WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Welcome to Flashpoint here on WCNC Plus. I'm Ben Thompson, joined by Julie Kay. After about a year-long hiatus, we have decided to bring back Flashpoint because what better time than Julie on the eve of the North Carolina primary.
It's a big one.
It is.
It is a huge one. We've got a lot of guests lined up because this is, just not even at the primary level. This election is going to be huge for North Carolina. But starting out, seeing what voters think, we're already seeing a big turnout. It's going to be really interesting.
It is. So we've got a couple of guests lined up for you today, including the GOP chair here in Mecklenburg County and the chair of MECDEMS as well. But let's begin with Chris Cooper. He is a professor at Western North Carolina University and an author of Anatomy of a Purple State. Professor, thanks. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, let's look ahead to the primary. It's what everybody's talking about in North Carolina, I feel like, these days. In your mind, as a person who for our purposes, is the expert here, is North Carolina going in this primary as purple as it's ever been?
Yeah, absolutely, right? The general context for North Carolina is a purple state, right? We've got 10 council of state offices, 5 are Democrats, 5 are Republicans. Doesn't get much more purple than that. I think by really any metric we could use, that's exactly how we're entering into this primary. But at the same time, we got to remember a lot of the state is incredibly divided, right? Our congressional districts and our state legislative lines usually are drawn to benefit one party or the other. So we're sort of incrementally at the small level, blue or red, but that averages to something like purple. And I think what that means for the primary is this is really where the action is 90% of the time.
Now, Chris, I know everyone is watching the Senate race ever since Tom Tillis says he was not going to be running for re-election. It's really been one of the most watched races in the country. How would you describe at this point how important this is on the national stage?
On the national stage, it's incredibly important. Not so much the primary, right? I think we all expect that Michael Whatley is going to be the Republican nominee, that Roy Cooper is going to be the Democratic nominee. That's how we're going to move forward to the general. But when it gets to be the real general election, we're the key, right? There is no scenario in which the Democrats take the United States Senate that does not involve them flipping the state of North Carolina. So we're talking $500 million, $750 million, maybe even $1 billion with a B dollars that are going to be spent in the old North State for this general election, for this U.S. Senate race.
It makes the old Senate race between Elizabeth Dole and Kay Hagan seem quaint. And that was a barn buster at the time. Goodness gracious. Let's say you're right and Michael Whatley comes out of this primary. Does he come out of this primary newly strengthened and emboldened with the entire party behind him? Or do you see there are still some fractures within the state Republican Party?
Look, there's some fractures, but I don't think it's anything meaningful. There's always going to be a few fractures. You're going to have some Democrats who aren't wild about Cooper. You're going to have some Republicans, probably slightly more, that aren't wild about Michael Whatley. But at the end of the day, I think those Republicans who aren't wild about Whatley are going to look at Whatley and they're going to look at Roy Cooper, somebody who they have spent, the better part of 3 decades campaigning against. And I think they're going to go with Michael Whatley. And look, he's going to have no trouble raising money. He's incredibly well networked. The guy was the head of the Republican National Committee, for goodness sakes. He's going to bring in money from North Carolina, South Carolina, North Dakota, and Idaho, and everywhere in between. So I don't think those fractures are going to create any sort of real problem for him moving towards the general.
And Chris, I do think it'll be interesting just to see at this point how much President Trump's support for Michael Whatley helps him in this race at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly in the primary he thinks it will, right? So every mailer that I've gotten about Michael Whatley has had Donald Trump's name mentioned as often, if not more often, than Michael Whatley, right? The TV ads, the YouTube ads I've seen, they're all about connecting Whatley to Trump. That's a great strategy in a Republican primary. Is that a great strategy in a general election where Donald Trump's numbers keep going down and down and down in the state of North Carolina? I guess that remains to be seen. But, I think he's going to be all in on the Trump strategy one way or the other.
The other sort of hallmark race that a lot of folks are following is a state Senate race. Now, state Senate races are not always the most exciting, at least not on a statewide level, and certainly not one that's not in our Charlotte viewing area. But this one's a bit different because you got Phil Berger, the Senate leader, arguably the most powerful politician right now in the state of North Carolina, facing a very strong challenger in a Republican primary that a lot of Republicans sometimes can take for granted. Explain to us the dynamics, the political dynamics that led up to this sort of contest happening and it being such a big deal.
This is the most important primary, certainly on the state legislative side, in the history of North Carolina. And I feel comfortable making a statement that big, which I normally do not make, right? This is everything for the state of North Carolina. Phil Berger is, I think, as you said, arguably the most powerful person in the state. I might even take out the arguably. Like, this is the man with the power. He's had the power since 2010, and he's done a masterful job amassing it and accumulating more and more and more towards goals that his party and he tended to agree with. But this challenger from Sam Page is real, right? Here's a sheriff who's been elected for multiple times. These are folks who know each other, from all accounts do not like each other, right? They're both from Rockingham County. And the early voting data are really interesting, right? So there's actually more folks who live in the Guilford County part of Senate District 26 than the Rockingham County part. But guess what? In early voting data, Rockingham is through the roof, much more so than Guilford. So I think a lot of folks think, hey, that might be good news for Sam Page. So through the last quarterly filings, we saw Sam Page had raised like $30,000. Phil Berger had raised like $1.8 million. And the guy with 30,000 might actually pull this thing out. It's just wild.
I think it's important to note, too, that we are still going into this primary with no state budget. I'm curious how the primaries, the election, might impact how Senator Berger goes forward.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see the same thing myself, right? So Sam Page has clearly tried to use that against Phil Berger. He's tried to say, hey, look, there's one job of, well, the most important job anyway, the legislature is to pass a budget. He hasn't done it. But if Berger does come out of this thing, or if he doesn't, right, I'm really interested to see how much he is willing to push for a budget. We have this impasse between the Republican-controlled House, the Republican-controlled Senate. There's this old adage in American politics, right, that the other party is the opposition, but the other chamber is the enemy. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in North Carolina. So that between chamber dynamic is sort of the thing to watch in terms of legislation and policy over the course of the next few months.
I realize that you are a professor, not a prognosticator, but still, I'm going to try to pin you down. Who do you think ekes out a win in this race?
Roy Cooper, Michael Wiley. That's the one you meant, right?
Yeah, right.
So in SD 26, I really don't know. The fact that it's close to me is the story, right?
Yeah.
What we don't, I think if the voting would have stopped today, Sam Page probably wins this thing. But the voting doesn't stop today, right? It's going to continue on until Election Day, and that's the part of the equation we just don't know. Are these Berger voters waiting, keeping their powder dry until Election Day? If so, he's going to pull this thing out. But if they stay on the couch, as it seems like they might have been doing thus far, it could be a sea change in North Carolina politics, not in terms of partisanship, but in terms of who has power, and maybe just as importantly, who has access to that power.
Well, with there being so many important races, even at the primary level, do you expect voter turnout to be higher than you might anticipate for a non-presidential year?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, somehow, amazingly, we are actually running ahead of 2024. In other words, more people have showed up to vote in 2026, a midterm, than have voted in 2024, a general election with a president on the ballot. Not general primary with a president on the ballot. This is wild, right? We're seeing really incredible numbers of people showing up to vote. The question we don't know the answer to is, are these people choosing to vote early, or are these people who are turning out to vote in greater numbers? Is this an early voting effect or a voter turnout effect? My guess is it's a little bit of both, that we're going to see higher turnout than usual in 2026, but it's going to look a little bit down from what these kind of massive numbers we've seen in the primary, in the early voting, excuse me.
Why do you think that's happening, that turnout?
Look, there's a lot of attention on North Carolina. I think Democrats are pretty fired up. We're seeing the same thing in Texas happen, right? So Texas has early voting going on right now for their primary. It's the same day as North Carolina. They're also seeing higher than normal turnout, particularly higher than normal turnout among Democrats. Democrats appear to be fired up and turning out. Unaffiliated voters in our state are choosing the Democratic primary more often than the Republican primary, which again, I think says there's a lot of action, a lot of excitement on the left right now. It's that negative partisanship. I don't think it's so much that they're loving their candidates, but they're really not liking the other party's candidates.
And I know this is probably specific to each election, but if you could just put it simply of what you think North Carolina cares about right now. I know we've had Border Patrol here in Charlotte. Obviously, Helene is still on the top of people's minds. What do you think is going to win out and be the most important thing for people?
I think it's become cliche for a reason to say affordability. I really do think that's it. We used to call that economy, right? We had this old line, it's the economy stupid. Well, now it's affordability stupid. It's kind of old wine in new bottles, but it's still the thing that matters. ICE and whatever people believe, either way, right, about the presence of ICE in Charlotte and immigration enforcement more generally. And I think you're right to mention Hurricane Helene. I think if the Democrats get their way, what people are going to be making a decision based on is a lack of state budget, but that's pretty wonky, right? We have a system in the state of North Carolina where we actually keep the old budget, so a lot of North Carolinians probably aren't even aware that the General Assembly has not done job number one, which is to pass a budget.
Final question here. Make us smarter, because not all of us are professors like you. So come primary night, you'll be watching these returns. What single data point are you going to be looking for?
Turnout on election day, right? We're going to know by that point what the turnout looks like on through early voting, but election day, obviously, we don't know what those numbers are going to be looking like. So that's probably the big one, is just turnout. How many people are getting their behinds off the couch, engaged in the process? That's going to tell us some about what's going to come out of this primary, but also about just kind of general levels of political engagement as we get ready for this fall season that's going to be just wild.
Yeah, lots to look forward to. Chris Cooper, Western Carolina University, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Stick with us. Welcome back to Flashpoint here on WCNC Plus. We're now joined by Wesley Harris, chair of the Mecklenburg County Democratic Party. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Big day on Tuesday. What is your first thought going into the primary? What are you looking at?
Well, we got some high-profile races in Mecklenburg County, and so the big ones are going to be the sheriff's race and a few state house races, particularly State House 106, which is Carla Cunningham's seat, and State House 99, which is Nassif Majid's seat. And so those will be the first three, I guess I'll be looking at.
And like a good parent, you don't pick favorites.
Yeah.
As party chair, I realize. But personally, which one do you find the most fascinating as a person who enjoys politics?
I think Carla's district is the most kind of fascinating, because that's the one where a lot of outside money is coming in and a lot of outside forces are coming in, and it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. I mean, when Carla made her vote on a few of the overrides, and particularly her speech on immigration on the floor, there were calls from all over the state of things we should be doing, but it's my philosophy that I don't get to determine who a Democrat is, and the party doesn't get to determine who a Democrat is. The people have to determine it. And I told him, I'm like, listen, this is a very unique district. It's a working class district in the northeastern part of Charlotte, and so it's got to be, any challenge has to be organic. And I told that to everyone who was looking to run against her. I'm like, listen, it's the people. You got to get the people to vote for you. And so I'll be very interested, because again, Carla has brought a lot of money back to the district, and she's been a reliable vote for the budget, which is why you get that money. And so it's going to be, do voters care about what they get from the state government, or do they want someone who truly represents their values? And so we'll see what happens on Tuesday.
And you mentioned that speech that she made on the floor. I think that really just brings to light the conversation we're having in this country. Charlotte has become kind of a harbor of that conversation when we had Border Patrol here. What are you expecting to see in the primary? How immigration enforcement is going to impact that?
And that's a big question. That's something that it was kind of on the periphery in the first Trump administration, but it is centerfold this time. And so, it is just riled up people across the state. And I think Charlotte handled it exceptionally well when Border Patrol came here, and people are fed up about it. I mean, a lot of folks here are immigrants, legal immigrants, and so they know that immigration and diversity is is our strength, and that we need to stand up for that and really try to center it back to the reason that, Republicans are using this as a wedge issue because there's so much economic anxiety, and they're like, the immigrants are the reason, but they're not the reason. It's because Republican policies are making people poorer, and we need to push it back to the fact that we are still the only state in the country that does not have a state budget, and focus on, if you want to make sure that people actually have public safety, invest in public safety, pass a state budget, do what you're meant to do, instead of doing all these culture war issues that don't affect people's lives day to day as the economic issues do.
And I always feel the need to point out, we don't have a budget, but the Republicans control both chambers in Raleigh, so it's not a matter of two different warring parties. It's two different warring factions. Arguably, the biggest race on a very local level is the sheriff's race. Perhaps less political in the partisan sense, political probably in other ways.
Right.
Size that one up for us.
That one's interesting. Sheriff McFadden has been very outspoken since he first got elected, and I know immigration's taken full focus in that race too. Which, if people remember, back in 2018, that was when I was first elected to the legislature. That was a contentious sheriff's race between Erwin Carmichael and Gary McFadden over 287G, over the immigration issue, and Sheriff McFadden won that in a landslide. And he's been very outspoken since, and so no one can ever make the claim that Sheriff McFadden misappropriates himself during the campaign. And so, he believes what he believes. He says what he says and says what he believes, and so it'll be interesting. I think the most interesting aspect of that race is that there's so many people running for it. I think he would potentially be in much more trouble if there was only one person running against him, but the fact that there's 4 people running against him and all of them are very qualified, I think that lowers the threshold. And in North Carolina runoff, you just have to get over 30% of the vote, and so it's very, very difficult to get to a runoff. And so I think if Sheriff McFadden does get reelected, I think one of the things he can thank for that is how many people ran against him. So it'll certainly be interesting. I'm very interested to see how all that'll play out in the voting booths.
I was at the House Oversight hearing in Raleigh where McFadden was in the hot seat for 3 hours.
Right.
It was a very long, heated hearing. I'm curious if you think that's going to have a large impact. Obviously, that goes beyond immigration. It's just a larger talk about public safety, where Republicans were very hard on him.
Well, one of the things I'll say as someone who served in the state legislature is a lot of that news never makes it to the local people. And Raleigh is kind of a bubble. I mean, you do state legislative name ID after they've been up there for a couple of years, and it's still 2%, maybe. And so, I think a lot of people saw that for what it was. I think even Steve Harrison with WFAE wrote an article about it was a missed opportunity for Republicans because they spent so much time on the political theater for Sheriff McFadden instead of actually talking about public safety, which I would welcome that conversation of making sure that we have the funds that we need to actually invest in public safety. And so I think a lot of people saw through that of just the political charades that it was and political theater that it was of just gotcha questions over. And at the same time, they're doing that instead of the actual job that they were elected to do, which is pass a budget and actually invest in North Carolinians.
The biggest race in the state is a Senate race. Barring some unforeseen circumstance, we know who your guy's going to be in the general election. But Republicans are still battling it out with 3 people who arguably have name recognition. Who do you think Roy Cooper will be facing come the general?
I think it'll be Michael Whatley. The question will be, what is his margin in the primary, and how fractured will this make the Republican electorate? Because back in 2024, no one gave Michelle Morrow a chance to take down an incumbent public instruction superintendent, Catherine Truitt, and she won big. And so I'll be curious of what that sector of the Republican electorate looks like this year. I mean, Trump has obviously endorsed Michael Whatley, and that carries quite a bit of weight. And so I'll be curious if she cracks that 30% threshold or something, or we'll see how much of that base is really striving for someone in the Michelle Morrow, in the Mark Robinson fold versus someone who they're trying to make seem, obviously they're not, seem middle of the road. But I think Whatley will certainly take it. It'll just be a question of what the margin is.
The impact, I know we're talking kind of far in the future now, but the impact that would have on North Carolina and the U.S. if Cooper's able to flip this seat. Tell me about that.
It's huge. And, North Carolina is one of the most pivotal states in the entire country, not only because we're one of the ones with a flippable Senate seat this year, but our demographics. We have more rural voters than any state other than Texas. And so I think the future of the Democratic Party itself hinges on North Carolina, because strategies that work in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia don't work in North Carolina because we simply don't have the urban population that those states do. So if we're able to build that geographic coalition, get Roy Cooper elected, flip some of these state legislative seats, and change the balance of power, I think that's a template for the rest of the country in terms of the Democratic Party and in terms of governing and the rest of the Trump administration of what that means for the people of not only North Carolina but the country. If we can break through this logjam, add some checks to the Trump administration, I think we're going to take the House back. We have it's going to be a little tougher to take the Senate back, but I think if with Governor Cooper, soon to be Senator Cooper, up there, I think we have a great shot to be able to do that. And so it'll just help bring balance back, and then we have to use that to actually deliver for the American people. And I think really that's what we've seen the past couple of years, of things keep going back and forth because people are frustrated and the government isn't working for them. And so at some point we have to deliver, or we're going to keep seeing this chaos.
Quickly, I want to get your opinion. We're taking wagers. Phil Berger, Sam Page. You were in the legislature,
Yeah.
so who do you think wins?
My wish is that Sam Page wins. There's so much money.
Not because you're politically aligned with him either.
No. Yeah, no. It's I'll be drastically voting against and standing against anything they stand for, but it would just shift the power dynamics. I think Sam Page has a chance for it. They would not be pumping that much. I think they've spent probably over $5 million for a state Senate primary, which is bananas. And so they wouldn't be doing that if he wasn't scared, and they wouldn't be doing that if the numbers weren't coming back concerning. And so I'm gonna give Sam Page a nod there, and do whatever Lucky Charms have to do on Monday night to make sure that to make sure we have the right mojo and manifest that happening, because I think all of North Carolina would benefit from that.
Well, we talk about the state budget.
Yeah.
Goodness, that impact, I'm curious what that's going to do at this point.
Honestly, that's it. Like, it's, the House has seen that these tax cuts are way too aggressive and it's costing us, and the Senate wants to accelerate those tax cuts even more. And so I think we all knew that it was going to be tough to get a budget before this primary, because Berger was going to be, using his conservative bona fides of cut as much as he could. And so there was never going to be any type of compromise before this primary. And so if he loses, God knows what happens, because he's still going to be in control for the rest of the year. And if he wins, God knows what happens. And so it'll be a huge, if he somehow loses, it'll be a huge shift in the politics of North Carolina. And I have no idea how it's going to go, but it'll be, as someone who's not up there, it'll be fun to watch.
All right. Wes Harris, Chairman of MECDEMS. Nice to have you here in person.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
All right.
I think last time I was here was 2019, before the pandemic in person. Everything else was on Zoom.
Wow. Now I feel old. All right, Wes, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
More Flashpoint after this. Welcome back to Flashpoint here on WCNC Plus. Continuing our look at the primary on Tuesday here in North Carolina. Joining us right now, Kyle Kirby, head of the Mecklenburg County Party here, the GOP, Mecklenburg County Party. Kyle, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
All right, so I feel like we got to start with you with the Senate race, because it's the big one across the state. It's the Republicans sort of against each other in a variety of ways. What are your predictions for the Senate race?
Well, on our side, of course, Michael Whatley is the man to beat. He has President Trump's endorsement, which goes a very long way on the Republican side. I'd say probably coming up in a close second would be Don Brown. I'm not so sure about Michelle Morrow's chances. Michelle Morrow was a late entry into the Senate race. She's famous for beating Catherine Truitt in the primary for a state superintendent of education. But it's going to be between Whatley and it's going to be between Don Brown. And again, Whatley has the endorsement of Donald Trump, so that's going to be hard to overcome, especially with Republican voters.
How important is this seat for Republicans to win? I know we're looking far in advance, but how would you put that into words?
It is a must-win seat at all costs. If Cooper was to win the open Senate seat, it would be a catastrophe for not only Republicans but North Carolinians in general.
What are the strategies that you as a Mecklenburg County chair are using and across the state to get that message out to voters?
Well, of course, we have social media. Michael Watley and Don Brown both have raised a tremendous amount of money across the state to get the message out. Billboards, grassroots, door knocking, poll working. I mean, we have to just make sure that the operation is saturated across the state, that people know what the alternative is, whether it's Watley or Brown. The alternative to one of those candidates would be Cooper, and we all know how Cooper acted when he was in charge as governor during the pandemic. He had the nickname King Cooper, and we certainly don't want the second reign of King Cooper to come in the form of a Senate seat.
Let's talk about Phil Berger, arguably the most powerful politician in the state of North Carolina right now, facing a rare, strong challenger that you don't always see in politics in general.
Sure.
To see somebody so powerful facing such a strong challenger. What are your thoughts on the race?
Well, Sam is a very popular sheriff in that county. He is somebody that is able to connect with the voters very well. He certainly has a lot of grassroots activism behind him. Phil Berger, a very powerful, long-standing Republican, and I think it's quite obvious that he is worried about his seat. If he was not worried, I don't think we would have seen President Trump offer Sam Page a position in Washington to get him to step out of the race. But I think anything's possible in that one. I think that's going to be a lot closer race than the Watley versus Brown race for the Senate. But I think it's certainly one to watch.
Let me just follow up just real quickly, because for our viewers here in Charlotte, they probably don't follow that race as closely as they follow some other races, and you have a special inside look as a member of the GOP. What created this political dynamic in this race that allowed it to happen to the most powerful man in North Carolina?
Well, I think that just his long-standing position within the Senate. You know, he has been in there as a fixture for as long as I can remember, and I'm 40 years old. There's just people in that area, that Rockingham, General Hamlet area, that is really just ready for a change down there, and they think it would be suitable to put Sam in that position, then so be it. As Mecklenburg County Chair, that's something that's kind of on the periphery for us. Sure. It's not something that I'm necessarily exposed to, 24/7. I would say here in Mecklenburg, the races we really have to look at is in the primary, Tim Moore, Tricia Cotham, and then the race for appellate court judge, which is Smith versus Burns.
I know that this is not necessarily your wheelhouse, but I do want to talk about the impact of the state budget on really all the races, but particularly when we talk about Senator Berger. How is the lack of state budget, you think, impacting really any of the races? Will that be an impact, and how could that change after the fact?
I really think the impact of not having a state budget is really an afterthought. You don't see that as a talking point among really anybody. It's kind of an afterthought to say, oh, well, we don't have a state budget at this point. It's not really the first thing that people bring up.
Sure.
Really, the first thing that kind of I hear as a Mecklenburg County chair just out and about in the early voting locations are, I'm interested in hearing about the quote-unquote fake Republicans that are infiltrating the primary system here. In Mecklenburg County, we have two of the quote fake Republicans, and by fake Republicans, I mean Katie Barr in District 14 that changed her party affiliation just last year to be able to run in the Republican primary, and also Kelly Van Horn, which is done the same thing as a part of a cabal of teachers, about 6 of them or so, that also changed their party affiliations to run in the Republican primary just to disrupt what's going on, because we have an open primary system which allows people to vote in a primary. If you are an unaffiliated person, you can request a Republican or Democrat ballot. So what they've done is they've exploited that loophole, And that's what I'm hearing more about, is the exploitation of that loophole, than I am about a state budget not being passed.
Do you feel like it is a missed opportunity for your party? There is no one, I feel like, you have been more critical of as Republicans, especially recently, than the sheriff. And plenty will argue that for good reason. Yet, it's going to be a Democrat.
It will be.
Given the intense scrutiny of the current sheriff, did you guys miss a step there? That they're not even running somebody that could be a challenger? Or is that an acceptance of the electorate in Mecklenburg County and understanding where your resources should go?
So it's a strategic move in that if the Republican Party ran someone for sheriff, it could possibly take away from the ability of the Democrats to remove McFadden. Because above all else, McFadden must be removed. We cannot, as Mecklenburgers, abide a sheriff who does not know what branch of government that he functions under or able to name the 3 branches of government. That is a very simple thing for a chief law enforcement officer to be able to do, not to mention all of the deaths which have taken place under his tenure as sheriff, and the allegations from the chief deputies, the allegations of taking people to strip clubs and sheriff's department cars. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I cannot say as a Republican to vote for a Democrat who is running for sheriff against McFadden, but I can take my hands off of the situation and hope that the Democrats can use their common sense and find someone that is a more acceptable sheriff just to North Carolinians and Mecklenburgers in general. Because, listen, you all are in the news and you know much better than I do about how viral his conversation with the House Oversight Committee went. And let me say this, I watched the Democrat debate between the sheriff and the opponents, and McFadden's performance on that debate the other night was akin to a Saturday Night Live skit. It was an absolute joke. My prayer is that one of any of the 3 Democrat challengers for McFadden is able to beat him in the primary.
So I want to hit on this House Oversight Committee. I was there. He
Sure.
was sitting in that seat for 3 hours. Even prior to that moment, did you expect it to go that direction of just being in that seat for so long? Was that what you were expecting from that?
I was expecting him to be in the seat for a while, but I was not expecting him to not be able to answer a 6th or 7th grade social studies question.
And you think that's going to have a huge impact on Republican turnout, voters overall, just when we talk about the sheriff's race?
Well, the sheriff's race is a Democrat primary, so
Sure.
there won't be any Republicans voting in that primary unless they're unaffiliated and request a Democrat ballot. But at least I hope it will shed some light on the competency level of the sheriff. I mean, Mech GOP did all we could do in that we called for the resignation of the sheriff based off of his gross inability to name the 3 branches of government or his concept of how government works. But beyond that, I certainly hope that the Democrats will see the light and get someone that's far more qualified than McFadden in that position, because his position as sheriff affects everyone in this county and beyond the county as well.
Perhaps the only person who went more viral than the sheriff was our friend Republican Larry Shaheen. In the background, in his reactions, Larry's been on the show many times, and I got a good cackle out of that.
It's funny that you should mention that. I had a conversation with a mutual friend of ours yesterday about Larry rolling in the background, being at McFadden being unable to answer such a basic question.
Being Larry, that we've actually seen on the show many times, just like that. All right, Kyle Kirby with the Mech GOP. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. Love to come back.
All right, more Flashpoint after this. All right, before we leave you on this inaugural reboot of Flashpoint, I guess we want to talk about sort of the big headlines we saw. I'll go first. I think to have Chris Cooper, one of the smartest men we know in politics, to say that the Sam Page and Phil Berger race is the most important, consequential legislative race in state history. I mean, North Carolina's been around a long time.
This is an old state.
That's a huge statement if you're not following, politics closely.
And for it to be somewhere nowhere near here,
Right. Totally.
to have so much consequences, really,
I
for
know.
everyone. It's going
I
to be
know.
really interesting.
What did you think?
Ooh, I mean, as someone who was at the House Oversight Committee
Yeah.
with McFadden and, of course, Chief Patterson and Mayor Vi Lyles and CEO of CATS, Brent Cagle, I mean,
Yeah.
someone who was sitting there to see how that has impacted both the Democrats and the Republican view. They had very different thoughts. You know, Wesley saying he didn't really think it was going to have that much sway, but
Yeah.
Kyle Kirby obviously had a different opinion. I think how that actually impacts voters, as someone who's going to be out there talking to voters,
Yeah.
that's something I'm probably going to ask about. Did that impact you?
And which party is more tuned to the actual feelings of voters?
Sure.
Was something like that a big deal, or was it not a big deal?
Right.
Will be interesting to see. All right. Well, this was fun.
I'm excited to be here.
I was going to say, let's do it again.
I know. I think we have to.
All right, perfect. All right, thanks, folks, for joining us here on WCNC Plus Flashpoint. We'll be back here next week.